divorce papers were already on the table when Mirren Ashford walked into her own living room. She had been at the office until 8 that evening. The same office she'd kept quiet about for 3 years. The same work she'd told her husband was consulting. Vague enough to dismiss, specific enough to be technically true. She set her bag down on the console table near the door, the way she always did, and it took her a moment to register what she was seeing. Donovan, her husband of 11 years, was sitting on the couch. His mother, Gwen Hartley, stood near the window with her arms crossed, and that particular expression she reserved for situations she had already decided the outcome of. And beside Donovan, close enough that their arms were touching, sat a woman named Tasha Merrill, who worked in the events department of the Hartley family's hotel group and who had been, according to the text message Mirren had found 4 months ago and said nothing about, "The only person who actually gets me. We need to talk," Donovan said. Mirren looked at the papers on the table. She looked at Tasha, she looked at Gwen, who had the decency to glance away for exactly 1 second before looking back. "Okay," Mirren said. She sat down in the chair across from them. She did not cry. To understand what happened next, you have to understand what Mirren Ashford Cole, 38 years old, senior partner and silent majority shareholder of Northgate Capital Group, had spent the last 11 years building, and why almost no one in that room knew she had built it. She had met Donovan Cole at a fundraiser in Ottawa in the autumn of the year she turned 27. He was charming in the way that comes easily to men who have never been told no by anyone who mattered. Tall, easy-looking, the kind of man who remembered your drink order and made you feel, in a room full of people, like you were the only interesting one. His family had money, old money, the kind that had been laundered through enough time and philanthropy to feel respectable. The Hartleys owned 3 hotels in Ontario, a property development company, and a reputation for knowing the right people. Mirren's money was different. It was new, and it was hers, and she had made it in the particular way that women sometimes make money when they're smart enough to not let anyone know how smart they are. She had started Northgate Capital as a numbered company when she was 24, using the inheritance from her grandmother and a business partner named Fen Okafor, who was quietly brilliant and preferred to stay that way. They invested in real estate, then in small and mid-sized businesses across Ontario and Quebec, and then, slowly, in everything else. By the time Mirren married Donovan Cole, Northgate was managing assets that would have made Gwen Hartley's face do something involuntary. But Mirren did not tell him that, not because she was hiding it, exactly, because she had watched what happened to women who led with what they owned. She wanted to be known first. The problem was that Donovan never really tried to know her. He knew she worked in finance. He knew she was good at it. He knew it paid well enough that she could contribute to the mortgage on their house in Westboro. Without him noticing, she was doing more than her share. But the details, the company, the portfolio, the board meetings she attended under her grandmother's maiden name as a kind of early privacy measure that had simply never been corrected. He had never asked, and she had never explained, because the conversation never seemed to arrive. First, there was the early marriage glow, and then there were the years of trying to have children, and then there was the grief of not being able to, and then there was the distance that grief puts between two people when one of them doesn't know how to sit with it, and the other one stops trying to bridge the gap. Gwen had never liked her. That was its own kind of story. Mirren was not what the Hartley family had imagined for Donovan. She was too self-contained, too unimpressed by the things that were supposed to impress her, too slow to perform gratitude for being brought into a family that considered itself worth joining. There had been another woman, years before, named Paige Kemper, whom Gwen had chosen with the same quiet certainty that she chose table linens, and Paige had never fully left the picture, not in Gwen's telling of it. She appeared at Christmas dinners as a family friend, at Donovan's brother's wedding as a +1 of someone else, at enough events over enough years that Mirren understood exactly what she was being shown. She had stayed because she loved her husband, or she had stayed because she believed he was capable of being the man she'd married, and that the man she'd married was capable of choosing her. She was never entirely sure which one was true. The night the papers appeared on the table, Donovan had prepared what he must have thought was a speech. It covered the usual ground. They had grown apart. They wanted different things. He needed to feel free to pursue happiness. He actually used those words, happiness and free, in the same sentence, without any visible awareness of what that sounded like. Gwen, standing near the window, nodded along with the gravity of someone attending a memorial. Mirren let him finish. Then she asked, because she had spent 4 months preparing to ask it calmly, whether this decision had anything to do with Tasha, or whether Tasha's presence tonight was simply a coincidence. The silence that followed told her everything. What she did not say sitting in that chair with her hands folded in her lap, was that she already knew most of it. She had known about the text since March. She had known about the weekend in Tremblant that Donovan had described as a team retreat. She had known, in the way that women who pay careful attention eventually know, that her marriage had ended sometime in the previous year, and she was the last one to have been told. She said none of this out loud. She signed the papers 3 weeks later after her lawyer had reviewed them and confirmed that the settlement Donovan was proposing was slightly generous, likely because Gwen had advised him to make it clean and quick and over. What no one in that room knew was that the morning after the divorce was filed, Northgate Capital Group submitted a formal acquisition offer for Hartley Hospitality Inc. The Hartley family's troubles had started 18 months earlier, though they had not known they were troubles yet. The second of their 3 hotels, a mid-century property in downtown Kingston that the family called their flagship, had been hemorrhaging money for years through a combination of deferred maintenance, poor management decisions, and the particular kind of arrogance that comes from assuming a respected name is a business strategy. The property development arm had taken on too much debt during a period of rapid expansion and was now servicing loans at rates that made the quarterly statements difficult to read if you understood what you were looking at. Donovan had understood vaguely that there were cash flow concerns. Gwen had framed it as temporary, a correction, the kind of thing that resolved itself. The board of Hartley Hospitality, made up largely of family members and old associates who had been appointed rather than elected, had agreed with her because they always agreed with her. Maren had known the actual numbers for almost a year, not because she had done anything improper, because Fenn, doing routine market research on Ontario hospitality properties, had flagged the Hartley portfolio as a potential acquisition target based on publicly available signals, the refinancing activity, the delayed permit renewals, the Kingston Hotel's declining occupancy rate showing up in regional tourism data. He had brought it to Mirren without any editorial comment. She had looked at the file for a long time without saying anything. Then she had told him to begin the preliminary analysis and to route all correspondence through the trust structure they used for sensitive acquisitions. She did not tell him why she wanted the discretion. He did not ask. By the time Donovan handed her the divorce papers, the Northgate offer was already drafted. She had not accelerated it because of the divorce. She had not held it back because of the marriage. She had looked at it as a business decision and let it proceed at the pace a business decision should proceed at, which is to say the pace that maximizes the buyer's position and minimizes the seller's awareness of who they're dealing with. The offer came in at a number that was fair, not generous, fair, and it came from a numbered holding company called Clearwater Assets, which was one of 4 holding companies that sat between any given transaction and the name Northgate Capital Group, which itself was not publicly associated with the name Mirren Ashford Cole by anyone who hadn't been specifically told. The Hartley board reviewed the offer in a meeting that Gwen chaired. She called it reasonable. She recommended they accept it, given their circumstances. She did not know who was making it. Neither did Donovan. The sale closed on a Tuesday. The transfer of control was handled by lawyers, as these things are. There were no announcements. The first indication the Hartley family had that something had shifted came 6 weeks after closing, when the new ownership group requested a strategic review meeting with the senior leadership of Hartley Hospitality. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning at the Kingston Hotel, partly because it was the property that needed the most immediate attention, and partly because Mirren thought it was the right place to begin. She arrived 12 minutes early. She wore a dark coat and her grandmother's watch, which she had started wearing again after the divorce for reasons she didn't examine too closely. Fenn was with her, along with 2 members of the Northgate advisory team and a lawyer from their firm in Toronto. The lobby of the Kingston Hotel was exactly as tired as the numbers had suggested. The carpets were a shade of burgundy that belonged in 1994. The front desk was understaffed. A light fixture above the entrance had 2 burned-out bulbs that no one had replaced. Donovan was already in the meeting room when they arrived. He was there in his capacity as a board member and as the family's representative for the review, a role Gwen had assigned him because she had a conflict that morning that Mirren suspected she had invented. Donovan was looking at his phone when Mirren walked through the door. He looked up. The expression on his face moved through several things in a short period of time. Mirren. He said her name the way you say something you weren't expecting to see, not the way you say a person. What are you doing here? Fenn, who had been Mirren's business partner for 14 years and who had met Donovan exactly twice at company functions, set his briefcase on the table without comment. I'm here for the review, Mirren said. I don't. Donovan stopped. He looked at the lawyer. He looked at Fen. He looked back at Mirren. I don't understand. She sat down across from him and opened the folder she had been carrying. Inside was the organizational chart for Clearwater Assets and its parent companies, laid out clearly the way she always prepared documents, with care, without drama, in a font that was easy to read. She set it on the table and turned it to face him. It took him a moment to read it. She watched him read it. By what right are you in this room? He said, and it came out less like a challenge than like a genuine question, because he was genuinely confused, and she almost felt sorry for him in that moment. The way you feel sorry for someone who has made a decision they cannot undo and has only just understood what it cost. Ownership, she said. She did not say it to hurt him, though she understood it would. She said it because it was accurate, and because she had spent 11 years being precise about the things that mattered, and this was one of them. The strategic review lasted 4 hours. Donovan barely spoke. By the end of the first hour, he had made a phone call, to Gwen, presumably, and by the end of the second, Gwen had arrived, slightly breathless, in the kind of cashmere that said she'd dressed quickly but well. She stood in the doorway of the meeting room and looked at Mirren with an expression that was hard to categorize. Not quite shock, not quite anger, something closer to the feeling of having played a very long game and realizing, without being certain of exactly when, that you had lost it. I'd like to understand, Gwen said carefully, because she was always careful. How this happened. It happened the way most things happen, Mirren said. Someone looked at the numbers and made a decision, and you didn't think it was appropriate to. Gwen stopped herself. To what? Mirren asked. And she asked it simply, without sharpness, because she genuinely wanted to hear the end of that sentence. Gwen did not finish it. What followed over the next several months was the kind of restructuring that Northgate was good at. Methodical, unsentimental, focused on what the properties could actually be if they were managed by people whose primary loyalty was to the numbers rather than to the family mythology. The Kingston Hotel was renovated over 8 months. The debt was restructured. 2 members of the board were replaced by professionals. Tasha Merrill, whose events management role turned out to have been a created position with no measurable deliverables, was let go in the first round of staffing review, not because Mirren directed it, but because the review was conducted by an independent team with a mandate to cut positions that couldn't justify their budget lines. Mirren had not orchestrated this. She had simply allowed the process to be honest. Donovan resigned from the board before the second quarter review. He sent her a message through her lawyer, not to her directly, but through the formal channel, asking if they could speak. She read it twice. She did not respond for 10 days, and then she responded through her own lawyer, politely, to say that she didn't think there was anything that required a conversation. It was Fen who told her, months later, when the Kingston Hotel had opened its renovated lobby to a quiet but solid reception, that a profile piece was being written about Northgate Capital for a business publication out of Toronto. The journalist had done the work, traced the holding structures, interviewed former colleagues, found the public records. The piece would name her. It would describe the Hartley acquisition. It would use phrases like strategic vision and long-term positioning. Mirren read the draft when it was sent to her for fact-checking. She made 3 corrections, a date, a figure, a spelling, and sent it back. The article ran on a Wednesday. Her phone was full of messages by noon. A few were from people she hadn't heard from in years, colleagues from her early career, old contacts who had known the outline of what she was doing, but not the scale. One was from a former university roommate who simply sent a screenshot of the headline with no caption. One was from her mother, who said she had always known, and Mirren believed her, because her mother had always been the kind of person who looked at you carefully and didn't say what she saw until the moment was right. There was no message from Donovan. She was sitting in the renovated lobby of the Kingston Hotel the afternoon the piece ran, because she had a meeting there at 3, and because she liked to arrive early in places she was responsible for and just sit with them for a while, the way her grandmother had taught her to sit with things rather than rush through them. The light was better than it had been. The carpets were gone, replaced with something warmer and less desperate. The 2 bulbs above the entrance had been replaced within the first week, because she had written it on her list the morning of the review meeting and sent it to the facilities team before she left the parking lot. Small things, done right matter. She drank her coffee. She waited for her 3 o'clock. Outside, the afternoon light was coming off the water in that particular way it does in Kingston in the autumn, flat and silver and very quiet. She had not wanted any of this. Not the divorce, not the acquisition, not the profile piece, not the phone full of messages. She had wanted an 11-year marriage to a man she loved to be the thing that lasted. She had sat with that loss the way she sat with most things, without rushing it, without pretending it wasn't real. She still sat with it sometimes in the early mornings before the day got loud. She thought she probably always would, but she had also built something steadily for 14 years in the quiet and the early mornings and the evenings no one asked about. And it was hers. That part had always been hers. It still was. Her 3 o'clock arrived. She closed her coffee cup. She stood up and extended her hand and said, "Thanks for coming," the way she always started meetings, without preamble, without drama, getting straight to what mattered. The light above the entrance was on.